And we're live. Hello. Sorry we're late. We were a minute late because at the very last minute, we decided we wanted to move where we were in the shrine room, which was
your idea.
Was a sort of good idea, and it made us late in the end. So I'm sorry about that. My name is Jnanavaca. This is
Maitreyabandhu. My name is Maitreyabandhu.
So we're here again on our usual, as it were, Thursday night parables for the pandemic slot. That's what we've been calling it.
Well, that's what we called it.
We called it. Maybe that's not what the advertising. Anyway, parables for the pandemic is what I'm calling it. And so last week we had an interruption, didn't we? For very good reasons. We had the home retreat.
We had the home retreat.
But you'll remember, if you've joined us before, that these Thursday evenings we've been exploring stories from the White Lotus Sutra, particularly as Bhante Sangharakshita, our founder and teacher, how he's commented on them in the Drama of Cosmic Enlightenment. That's the book. Can you see the book? So we've been telling stories, and Maitreyabandhu has particularly been emphasizing that stories, parables, myths, they are very, very, very important ways of allowing us to imaginatively connect with both the ideal and the path. The Dharma as ideal, but the Dharma as journey, as path. Why are they so important? It feels to me like stories get under the skin, they get under the surface of our experience, don't they? Anyway, we've been exploring that. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But first of all, I just want to say, if you're joining us for the first time, if you've not been here before, a double welcome.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And what we'll be doing this evening is I'll say a little bit of introduction, then we'll have a little bit of meditation, just for five or so minutes. And then I'm going to hand over to Maitreyabandhu, who's going to this week be starting a new parable, which I'll say a little bit about. Then Maitreyabandhu will say something about that. We'll have time for questions. So if you do have questions, you can write them in the chat as normal. We're joined by Sanjay and Matt, who we both live with in the community above. So Sanjay and Matt are our tech crew. And then we'll finish just a little bit before 8 for time, if you want to clap for the carers, as we have been doing. Yeah. So yes, welcome all of you. How many are we here, Sanjay? 76 of us. So
That's
welcome all of you. So this thing about stories, I think there's something in me anyway that hasn't grown up beyond the age of 10 or something. And I can remember, I'm sure we can all remember, being told stories as children, or reading stories maybe as children, and the sort of immersion, the total immersion that would happen. And I had this experience recently. I was saying last week, I watched this play called The Encounter, which was originally at the Barbican a few years ago. And in fact, we went to see it, didn't we?
Yeah.
And it's a story. It happens to be a true story, but it's just one man on stage telling you this story using the technology of very, very interesting technology around sound. And you have to wear headphones in order to watch and listen to this play, The Encounter. And he creates all sorts of sound effects, some of them just created like a crisp bag. He rustles a crisp bag, and on a loop, it turns into a fire in your... And he conjures this world, and it is both wonderful and terrifying, the world that he conjures up, just by story. And more powerfully than if we'd had a film of it, much more powerfully. The thing with the Dharma life is, I think that it's so intellectually, it's not complicated. I know sometimes it seems like that, but it's not complicated. The really difficult thing is to galvanize our will, our emotions, our resolve behind the path that we already intellectually know makes sense. And myths and stories have a way of moving us, touching us, sparking us off. Now, this particular story tonight did that for me when I first encountered it. I first encountered this story when I was relatively new to Buddhism, to Triratna, and so I'm going back about over 20 years, I don't know how long. And I didn't know why it had touched me so much, but it did. And there was this sort of mysterious sense of it spoke to me very, very deeply. I know I'm not unique in this. It's not that I'm special. This story has that sort of power. And it still does to me 20 more years later. It feels like this story is saying something very, very deep about my life. And not just about my life, but about human life. And we're going to tell it over a number of weeks. It's longer than... So 2 weeks ago, we were doing the parable of the rain cloud. You'll remember that. And, well, maybe you'll remember it.
Well, look back on it. You can watch it again.
And there's more. We found there was more to say than we actually had time for.
Yes, that's right.
Because we thought, oh, well,
we often do find that.
Once we start talking, there's no stopping us. So anyway, we won't go back over the rain cloud. It's done. But this story we're going to spend a few weeks on. I don't know how long. We'll just sort of unfold it and see what happens. So it's the myth of the return journey. The myth of the return journey. That's how it's referred to in the White Lotus Sutra, which is one of the most important texts for Mahayana Buddhism.
And we've called it something like "Who You Really Are," or "Understanding Who You Really Are." Discovery.
Yes.
You know, so it's to do with.
I came up with that.
Yeah, did you?
Yeah.
That's all right. Anyway,
that's not important.
What? No, it's not. It's to do with discovering. It's the myth is about who you really are.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd chip that in.
Good time.
No, that's very good.
Okay, so let's start. Let's start by.
There are jokes occasionally. Don't be alarmed.
Let's start with some meditation. So I'd like us to settle. So if you're sitting on a sofa or whatever sort of chair you're sitting on, see if you can be both really comfortable, like the weight drops down through your sitting bones. It's really good if you can also have a sense of uprightness, of alertness in the upper body. I normally recommend, if you're sitting on a chair, sit with your feet flat on the ground, and don't sort of slouch. Maybe don't lean back into the chair, or you might be sitting on your meditation stool or cushions at home. So I'll just lead us in a short period of awareness. So you might want to start with, as you settle, just noticing the sounds you can hear around you. And of course, there's sound of my voice, and maybe other sounds through this recording, through this live stream. But also there might be sounds around you, local to you. It's easy to get irritated when there are sounds, as if they're disturbing our meditation. But meditation is about developing awareness, and if we include sound in our awareness, without getting into stories or labeling, then they're just part of the meditation. Taking a few deeper breaths. And if you've been working today, or whatever you've been doing, see if you can start to let go of the preoccupations of your day. A conscious letting go. bringing of awareness into the present moment, particularly into the body and the sensations you can feel in the body. Noticing the sensations of contact with the seat you're sitting on, the actual sensations of pressure, hardness, softness, firmness, touch that you can feel in your sitting bones, in your legs and feet. You're not trying to change any sensations, you're just noticing simple experience. And imagining that the weight of your body is falling through those points of contact, deeper and deeper into the earth. Deeper and deeper, rooting us to the earth. We're part of the earth. And seeing if you can soften the muscles in the legs, in the thighs, in the calves. Imagining the legs becoming heavy and soft. And having a sense of the upper body, the spine, lifting the upper body. And a very slight sense of lift from the crown of your head. And softening the face. The brow becoming smooth. And all the muscles around the eyes and mouth loosening. And the shoulders falling away, away from the neck, away from the ears, down the sides of the body. Becoming aware of your hands. Myriad sensations in the fingers and palms and the backs of your hands. Sense of the hands being soft. Perhaps a sense of the energy, the vitality in your hands. And turning your awareness towards the sensations of breathing. As if the breath were massaging you from the inside, softening areas of tension. And once again, broadening your awareness to include the whole of the body. Bring some awareness to how you're feeling. And perhaps have an imaginative sense of all the other people tuning in, meditating together this evening. And opening your eyes when you're ready. Good. Very good. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Maitreyabandhu, who's going to, start introducing this myth of the return journey, this parable from the White Lotus Sutra. So over to you, Maitreyabandhu.
Yeah, thank you, Jnanavaca. Yes, Jnanavaca and I have been, I think, exploring these parables for many, many years. It's not just these sequences we've been doing. And then one of the things you get from parable is that every time you tell it, you find new things in it. One of the glories about telling these stories is that, like any story, it gathers new meanings through time. It touches new significances as you keep exploring it. So
also as you change.
As you change, yeah, that's right. And you see new things in it that you didn't see before. So I think parable is trying to say something about the universal significance of your personal experience. Strangely, it's trying to say that your life is very like a parable. That and parable is trying to say this is what your life is really like, isn't it? And that's why concepts and argument don't really work. It's trying to get under the skin of all that, like you were saying, and trying to say, this is how it feels like, doesn't it? Being human. This is the great matter that you're involved in. I think that's why parables live so long. They're still alive because they're doing that. They're trying to give your direct, intimate experience of being alive its universal and mythic significance. No less than that. So this parable from the White Lotus Sutra, this is the translation I've been recommended, Burton Watson's translation.
Awful cover.
Yeah, awful cover, terrible cover, but wonderful translation. I don't be put off the cover of the cover. So in the context of the parable is that the Buddha has just said that Sariputra is not only going to be, he's one of the great disciples of the Buddha, he's not only going to release himself from his own personal limitations and gain something like insight, he's going to eventually become a Buddha. And this new possibility is revealed. Yeah? And 4 elders are so moved by that, so inspired by that, that they tell this parable. So this isn't, according to the Sutra at least, this isn't told by the Buddha, it's told by the 4 parables, but it's given, told by the 4 elders, but it's given the Buddha's blessing. So it becomes Buddha Vachana, becomes the voice of the Buddha, really. And the parable, there's a lot to go into, I think, as we'll explore it over the weeks. But it's really a parable about life as a journey. You know, there's lots of different parables that approach your life from different perspectives, like life as a paradox, life as a conflict between dark and light. This is life as a journey, as a quest. You know? And it's of a return journey in this case. Yeah. So the story starts with once upon a time, really. At least I don't think it does in the Sutra, but it should do. It once upon a time always means outside of time. It's the fairy story nature of things, that this is how things are. Once upon a time, all times and outside of times, there was a man who wandered away from home. Yeah, he left his father and he wandered away from home. Yeah. And this man grows up. He's never got any money. He's always trying to find a job. He goes from one place to another, just trying to get the bare necessities, trying to get enough food to eat, doing sort of ordinary jobs. He just wanders away from home and goes from one place to another, just sort of trying to get jobs. Yeah? Very simply put. His father, and it's interesting because his father also moves from place to place in the parable. But his father moves from place to place and becomes very wealthy. In fact, and becomes fabulously wealthy, unimaginably wealthy. Yeah? So he moves from place to place, country to country, like his son, which is interesting, and I might say something about that. But in the father's case, he becomes, in the course of that, fabulously wealthy. Yeah? But even though the father is incredibly wealthy, he's surrounded by courtiers, he's got slaves, he's got attendants, he's like a businessman, and he does all these, he's done business deals and so on. He's done them clearly all these different countries. Even though he's very wealthy, he misses his son. He yearns for his son, which perhaps we might come on to next week. I think that's very interesting. But even though he's got everything the money can buy, actually, from his point of view, he misses his son. He always hopes that he'll see his son again. Meanwhile, his son has got it's been such a long time. He's wandered away again in that never, never land of once upon a time. He wandered away from his father, so much so that he's forgotten his father. He's forgotten the world he comes from. He's just got completely immersed in the world of ordinary need. As Wordsworth said, the world is too much with us, and he's just involved in hand-to-mouth stuff, trying to get a job, trying to get enough clothes. We could modernize that as well, just trying to get the ordinary things of life, money, sex, food. There's no sex in the Sutra, but but just the ordinary, everyday things of life. And in so doing, he forgets his father, And of course, he doesn't realize his father has become, in the meantime, fabulously wealthy, unimaginably wealthy. So you could say that's almost a backstory to the parable, because in my mind, the parable starts with a sort of set piece, a scene, where a ragged young man, looking filthy and tired and hard-pressed, is looking through a gate to this vast mansion that he's happened upon in his travels from one country to another. He's looking through this gate. Through this gate, he sees this incredibly rich man, and apparently he's counting gold, all these coins of gold, millions of coins of gold, and he's got someone fanning him, and he's got all these people around him, and he's sitting on this throne, and even his footstool, his father's, he doesn't know it's his father, of course, but even the footstool is decorated with gold and silver, and the man sits under this great, beautiful silk canopy. So what you start with is this vision of opulence, this vision of almost unimaginable riches, and actually of power, but perhaps we'll touch to that later, but unimaginable riches and power. And then this young man, hard on his luck, down a heel, gazing through the gates of this massive palace. And actually, his response is to be frightened. His response is to think, oh no, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't even be looking through the gate of this. I should be in a poor area town. These are not my people. I'm going to get, if they know I'm here, they're going to think I'm just, like a street kid, and they're going to throw me to jail or something. I need to get out of that. So his response to this incredible vision of beauty, of power, and of opulence, of riches, is a response of fear. So tonight, I just want to focus on that one image, that and a little bit of the backstory. Because the parable is saying, this is our human situation. I draw out three elements of our human situation from this very beginning of the parable. Firstly, I think of the parable as starting with this, this sight through the gate. I don't know whether you think of it like that, but that's every time I think about this parable, I see that man down on his luck, filthy, dirty, poor, in the wrong part of town, in Beverly Hills, as it were, looking through to this fabulous wealth and feeling frightened. So partly I think that's saying, because of course the elder is always the Buddha. So that's part, and the Buddha, remember, is a title. It's not his name. It means awake. It means the imperative, awake. So that represents that in life you can be awake. You can wake up to things, and that waking up feels a bit like this. It's like the Buddha's saying in this parable, the elders are saying in this parable, actually, you won't understand what waking up means, or awake. You don't understand what Buddha would mean. But what you can imagine, wealth, beauty, power, it's like endless versions of that. It's like something it's like, wow, that's what the parable's trying to say, is that it's something beautiful, incredibly wealthy, endlessly wealthy, abundant, lustrous, gorgeous, powerful, but not power over, but power to. We might come back to that. That's what you have to you, if you could but see it. And then the young man, the son, represents human poverty. He represents the human being, ordinary human consciousness, our consciousness, yours and mine, I'm afraid, as being a consciousness of poverty, of lack, of not being rich. Even in our modern parables of ourselves, in comparison with most of the world, we are rich. But even if we're literally sort of have money, emotionally, spiritually, psychically, human beings are poor. They're poor. If you're honest with yourself, you can really feel at times your own inner poverty, your own tendency to repeat yourself, your own lack of resources, you can feel. But comparison with enlightenment, it's incredibly poor. It's really down on your luck. It's really scrabbling around there in the gutters, in comparison with enlightenment. So this isn't a feel-good parable from the start. In a certain sense, it's saying human beings are poor, forked things, as King Lear says. It's very like what happens to King Lear. He becomes that. He takes all his clothes off, and he just becomes the poor human being, frightened, cold, at mercy to the elements, without money, without prospect, without knowing very much. One of the great things about King Lear, that great play, is it's that you see a king moving from a king to being the pauper, to being someone beset by humanity, by the woes of humanity, by the shocks of humanity. But I think the backstory might be important. So if you then have that standoff in that first image, you have enlightenment itself, reality itself, endless riches and beauty and power, albeit power of a particular kind. You have, in comparison, that ordinary human consciousness, a consciousness of poverty, of lack, of destitution, of spiritual smallness. But what's interesting is that the parable has this backstory that they were together, and then one went away, the son went away and became poor and got lost. And forgot his father. The father doesn't forget his son. Interestingly, he never forgets. He misses his son. And the father actually goes on to be more and more wealthy. So it's as if it suggests, it's first of all giving you an image for the goal. Here it is behind us in all of its goldenness. And you should see our retreat, our lovely Buddha figure of Vajrasana, even bigger and even more beautiful, I think. Because you need that image of this is your potential. Buddhism, in one hand, is saying this is who you really are. You've got this. It's not somebody else's, it's yours. Your human poverty is because you've got lost, because you've forgotten, because you've gone astray. It's not your fault. You haven't turned against your father. You've not rebelled. You just forgot stuff. And we human beings, golly, we're forgetting creatures, aren't we? We forget all the things that are most important very often. So it's that image of the awakened consciousness being rich, ordinary human consciousness being poor. But the backstory is saying, and there is a path. And one path is towards the richness of Buddhahood. And one path, it's interesting that the other path that the boy goes on, the son goes on, isn't a path towards, I don't know, it isn't a path to hell. It's just a path to being lost. You know, that sense of being horrible when you ever do get lost, of being lost, of not knowing your way, of just having to live hand to mouth because you don't really quite know what you're doing. You've forgotten who you are. And certainly, don't you feel that at times that you've sort of forgotten who you are? You've forgotten what you were doing. You've kind of done stuff, but you never decided to do that stuff. You went to university because your family went to university. You got that job because that's what your father said. You got into that relationship. That's because that's the kind of relationship you get into. But you can feel the sense of, I don't quite really know what I'm doing. I've got lost. So it's interesting that the backstory, I think, or at least one way of reading it, I think there are many ways, as there always is with parable. The backstory is sort of saying humanity has these two possibilities. You can either grow in riches and abundance and beauty and spiritual magnitude, or you get lost. You just get the world being too much with you. You just sort of dealing with the world, trying to get food, trying to get shelter, trying to do the stuff that everyone set out for you, living the life that people kind of think is the life to do. Even when it leads to riches, it doesn't. They trickle through your fingers. But you've got those two possible paths, and that neither of them are bad, interestingly. The son just gets lost. He doesn't go to hell. He doesn't hurt people. He's just lost, probably a bit lonely and afraid and hungry and poor. And that's the Buddha's vision of us. We're just lost, like children who get upset and poor. And what a shame, because did we but know it, our Father, the Buddha in this case, has infinite wealth, and that wealth can become ours. And that's going to be the whole drama of the parable, is how does that wealth that belongs at the moment to the Father get passed down to the Son? But we've got a long way to get before we get there. But that's what I want to bring up first, is this image of awakening and the majesty of that's in your consciousness now, and you can follow that up even without noticing. You often don't notice you're following that, or you can just get lost in the world as we find it, in your common sense assumptions, in living out what your family and friends expect of you. So I think that's where the parable starts. That's where it starts for me, at least.
I wanted to sort of add that for me, particularly what's significant is that the son has forgotten that he's who he is, that he is his father's son. That in getting lost, he's forgotten his true nature.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So his true, who he really is. It is potential in that he could have been the rich man, but in a deeper sense, it's who he really is. He's always his father's son.
Yes, that's right.
Whether he's realizes it or not,
yes,
as it
that's
were.
Right.
So I think that's very, very significant. That comes out more and more as the story goes on. But yeah, there is very much a sense of this story is saying this is our potential, the richness, but it's also who we really are, if we but knew it.
Yeah.
And the reason the son, not the reason, it's just that he doesn't identify himself with those riches, does he?
Yeah.
That's why he's lost.
In fact, he's got so alienated from it, he's frightened of it.
He's frightened of it. And so he's forgotten himself, not just the father.
Yeah.
He's forgotten his own
that's right.
identity.
He's forgotten that he's the son.
Yeah.
Of a rich man.
Which really speaks to me somehow. Yeah.
So perhaps we can open up for a bit of time for questions, because we want to make sure that parables are something we in a way, we all should be sitting around a fire and telling these stories. In a certain sense we are, but we wanted to share it with you. So it'd be interesting to hear any questions that you might have, or areas that does it strike you as a real picture, a universal picture of our human predicament? So, any questions or not? Have we struck you down? How many are here at the moment?
We've got 110 people here.
Great, good to hear. Great that you're all here. If you haven't got any questions, we can carry on talking about it, but you might have some questions.
Have we got questions, Sanjay?
Not yet.
I was struck by this thing of the Buddha being a father. Maybe you could say something about what happened as well. We're waiting for a question. Why is the Buddha our father? Actually, that is,
I mean, I don't think it's particularly a gender thing. I think that there's something about the father-son in this story, which I think is sort of pointing to an inheritance, that the Buddha, the enlightenment is our true inheritance. That's how I kind of read that. And of course, we've got biological parents, and maybe they've given us things. But this is sort of saying our real inheritance, our real purpose for being human and here, alive, is for some other inheritance. And it's not of that material world. So I think that the sort of parent-child thing is very, very potent.
And it's interesting, it's mirrored in the burning house, parable that we were telling the other day, that again, the elder there is to do with parent-child. So it's this fantastic metaphor of you being related to, in this case, the Buddha. That you are, it's really that you're the Buddha's son, really, or daughter.
That's the thing. I think we've got
blood relations.
We've got to make sure that, I mean, these come from a time when, there would have been very strong gender roles in society. So we've got to just translate that for ourselves and not get too stuck on the fact that they're both men and, and not to somehow make it universal for ourselves. So I wouldn't worry too much that it's a young man and it's his father. The gender thing's sort of irrelevant. But Buddhahood is beyond gender, where consciousness has all sorts of levels and layers to it. And we have conditioning that is to do with body and social constructs and social conditioning. But at its deepest or highest level, consciousness is beyond all conditioning. There is just glory and wealth and gold. And because Buddhism tries to personify that in symbols and parables, if you're going to embody something, it chooses a gender, as it were. That's how to think about it. But it's not really male or female.
Oliver asks, why weren't the father and son in contact?
Yeah, I think that's very important actually in the parable, is that isn't said. It's lost in the mist of once upon a time. So this parable isn't a parable of the fall.
The fall's happened.
Yes, but it's not sort of, the fall is a kind of, the rebel angels in Milton, they rebel against God and they fall from heaven. They're cast out of heaven by the triumphant angel. So it's kind of clearly not an act of disobedience. It's just, to me, it's not that the father and son have had a big row and the son's left. It's just
it's a forgetting.
It's a forgetting and a getting lost. It's not a rebellion.
But there is a fall in the sense of an alienation, forgetting. And I think the important thing is that has already happened in the backstory, if you sort of mean. We're not really told very much about why he wanders off.
No.
It's that we have already forgotten. The minute we were born, we'd forgotten.
Yeah.
So the fall, in that sense, the alienation has already happened. But interestingly, the father hasn't forgotten, has he?
No, that's right. Which I think is very, I don't know quite what that means, but if we're imagining this is the Buddha, it's suggesting that Buddhahood is kind of active, that it's sort of, the reality is, and I don't understand this, and I don't know, but the parable suggests that reality embodied by the Buddha is kind of looking for you, is active
and can see you
and wants you to come home to it. That's the meaning of the parable, that the enlightenment in this case isn't something grand and terrifying. If he wasn't the son, it would just be this grand and terrifying vision, but actually the father, the Buddha figure in this, misses his son and wants his son to come back. So it suggests that the metaphor is that reality is somehow looking for you, not just that you're looking for it. I don't know what that means, but for me, it does strike me as deeply true, but I'm not in a way that I can easily communicate. I've always felt called to the Dharma life as much as wanting to do it myself. In fact, often I've not wanted to do it myself, but felt very strongly called to do it, as if called by the Buddha, as it were, metaphorically.
And I think it's probably not uncommon, certainly it was for me, that what you were saying earlier, that before I came to the Dharma, I was going through life, doing just normal things that people do, career, job, university, friends, socializing. And I definitely thought, no, I'm not living the life I should be living. That somehow I'd forgotten something, and I didn't know what I'd forgotten, but I knew that this wasn't it. And I think that's not an uncommon feeling. Probably most people have had an inkling of that at some point in their lives, and I think most people bury it.
Yeah.
And I tried burying it. I tried burying it for
It's almost
15 years or something.
It's almost as if you do have a sense of your own poverty, but to have that, you have somewhere then a sense of the possibility of riches.
Yes.
That sense of lack must have within it that there could be
of the positive.
That there could be a no sense of lack.
Of more.
Yeah, of more. And I think I had that very, very strongly, even as a child, that I remember thinking, this can't be it.
Yeah.
This can't be right.
Yeah.
There's something deeply missing about this. People often say there must be more to life than this.
Yeah. And I think we just get influenced, don't we? Well, I did anyway, by people around us. And people, peers and people older than us, tell us, no, the way to do it is to get a decent job or find a partner, somebody you're happy with, to settle down, and go on a holiday and you'll enjoy that, and then that's it.
Yeah.
And everybody, it feels like, is conspiring to help us forget that there is something more to us.
Well, you remember grown-ups would sort of think, well, it's just a childish thing.
Yes, it's a fantasy.
You're just being lost in a fantasy. But I remember, right as a child, thinking, no, it's not a fantasy. There is having some weird incoherent sense that there is something to do, that I was poor and there must be a chance of riches.
And certainly in England, I don't know where you're watching from, I think there's such a degree of secularism. It's like we're not spiritual beings. Society doesn't, it's wiped out the spiritual. Maybe that's not true in Catholic countries. Maybe it's not true in other countries where religion is more prominent. But in England, as I've experienced it, there's a poverty, a spiritual poverty in the culture where we're not spiritual beings. And it's almost embarrassing to say that. I mean, it's embarrassing to say that we do have a spiritual dimension.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like we're putting on airs and graces.
Or it's like you're being terribly,
so special,
or being terribly sort of, pompous or something. I mean, quite a few thinkers recently have been talking about the void in the Western psyche, this sort of spiritual void. And some people are thinking that's one of the causes for lots of things that's happening to us. And I think they're onto something. There is a kind of spiritual poverty, despite our incredible good fortune. There's a kind of spiritual poverty, and a spiritual poverty is a human poverty. It's a communal poverty. It's a poverty of imagination, a poverty of love, and so on.
I think one of the things with this lockdown is people are discovering. I don't know, maybe that inkling again of my job isn't as important to me as I thought it was, or community is another value that I really hold highly, or the fact that the air is cleaner it is important to me after all. All of those things are slightly shifting some people's perspectives, and I love that because, of course, there's been horrors in this lockdown and tragedies and griefs, and there are going to be more to come. And I think there's potential for some people to rediscover something more meaningful than the sort of rat race that so many of us are trapped in.
So let's just see if there's any questions whilst we're talking, but there may or may not be. But
Maybe one more.
So there's quite a few questions about how can we remember our true nature, but I think you're going to be talking about that next week, aren't you? So I wondered if you'd answer this question of, did either of you feel fear when you first came to Buddhism? I think this is tapping into...
I didn't myself. When I first came to this shrine room when I was 25, and I was taught the mindfulness of breathing, and I immediately knew that I was a Buddhist, and I always had been a Buddhist, and I always would be. Actually, interestingly, I knew it would be hard for me. And all of those things, I'm afraid, have proved to be the case. So I wasn't frightened of it, I don't think. What do you think?
Oh, I don't know. I felt this mixture of, at last, I found a community where people are striving for something more. I felt very much that this was what I needed, wanted, had been yearning for. And I did feel wary. I don't know about fear. And I felt the wariness of organized religion, of whether this was some weird cult that would try and suck me in. So I felt wary of that, but not at a deeper level. I just felt a sense of, at last, of relief.
And up to a point, that wariness is intelligent, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are such things. But
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I did feel a bit more was I had a sense that the Dharma would ask everything from me.
Yes.
And I'm not sure I was frightened of that, but I wasn't at all sure whether I could feel a kind of momentum that actually wanted my life in a sense. And I still want, I wasn't sure about that. I'm not sure I'd characterize it as freer, but I definitely felt, this is going to massively change me if I do this. I'm going to be a different person.
With a different life, and I don't know what that will mean.
So I remember that very clearly. That I seem to know right from that first class that this is something you give your life to, that you dedicate yourself to. And I was still at art school. I was trying to have fun. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do that. That's it. That was a bit scary.
The seriousness of it.
The seriousness of it.
The hugeness of it. Maybe we should start wrapping up.
For now.
So next week we'll carry on exploring.
We haven't got very far with it so far.
So we've just got this scene.
Basically.
Of this, it was not even quite a meeting.
No.
But it's a scene.
Glimpse.
It's a glimpse, isn't it? Through these gates, as Maitreyabandhu described it. And next week we'll carry on the story of the journey. Because so far the journey hasn't really, it's just begun, really. There's a long way to go. So do tune in. And for now, all I want to do is say, if you can give us some more money. I know many of you have given, actually, and many of you have probably given recently on the home retreat. So many of you were very, very generous.
It's wonderful.
I've been very moved, actually. We've had some people give money who have given very generously, who have never stepped into this building physically. And I've been moved by all the generosity, but particularly people I've never met giving feels very, very moving, actually. And as we've been emphasizing on that retreat, we want to carry on this sort of sense of generosity that we aspire to. And we want to try and cultivate a whole community that sort of isn't transactional, isn't based on consuming and transaction, but is much more based on freely giving. So, we need the money. We need the money. I haven't got the figures and things. I'm not going to go into figures. But as you can well imagine, quite a number of sources of income have dried up. And just to keep the Buddhist Center going, it's quite a large operation that employs quite a number of people. And we've got this building to look after, and all of that doesn't stop, even though we're not running retreats and courses that generate quite a bit of money. So if you can give, even if you've already given, if you feel moved to, I'd really encourage you to give, and also to know that it's not, it'll be well spent. Nobody gets paid to teach here. So much of the centre is just run on a voluntary basis, although some people are given support, which is like rent and pocket money in order to keep the place going. So all the money goes to spreading the Dharma. So Sanjay or Matt will post a link. But I'd like us to finish with the Transference of Merit and Self-Surrender, as we've been doing. So if you would like to just make yourself comfortable again, and then we'll recite this in call and response as a way of ritually ending. Transference of merit and self-surrender. May the merit gained.
May the merit gained.
In my acting thus.
In my acting thus.
Go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
Go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
My personality throughout my existences.
My personality throughout my existence.
My possessions.
My possessions.
And my merit in all three ways.
And my merit in all three ways.
I give up without regard to myself.
I give up without regard to myself.
For the benefit of all beings.
For the benefit of all beings.
Just as the earth and other elements.
Just as the earth and other elements
are serviceable in many ways.
Are serviceable in many ways.
To the infinite number of beings.
To the infinite number of beings.
Inhabiting limitless space.
Inhabiting limitless space.
So may I become.
So may I become.
That which maintains all beings.
That which maintains all beings.
Situated throughout space.
Situated throughout space.
So long as all have not attained.
So long as all have not attained.
To peace.
To peace.
We'll leave it there, and hopefully we'll see you again next week.
Yeah.
Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.
Good.
See you soon.
See you soon.